Imagine this. You did everything right. You graduated school. You found a stable job. You show up every single morning, 40 hours a week, sometimes 50. You pay your rent or your mortgage on time. You cut back on eating out. You canceled subscriptions you didn't need. You did all the things the financial advice columns told you to do. And yet, at the end of every month, your bank account is dangerously close to zero. You're not poor, but you're definitely not okay. And you can't figure out why. This isn't a personal failure. This isn't because you made bad choices. This isn't laziness or a lack of hustle or bad luck. What you're experiencing is the result of 50 years of deliberate economic engineering. 50 years of policy decisions, corporate strategies, and financial system design, all pointing in one direction, away from you. Here is a number that should stop you cold. In 1971, the American middle class made up 61% of the total U.S. population. That means 6 out of every 10 Americans lived a recognizably middle-class life. A home they could afford, healthcare they could access, retirement savings that actually grew, and enough left over to enjoy their lives. Today, that number has collapsed to just 50%. And according to Pew Research Center, it is still falling. Every year, more Americans slide out of the middle class, downward. But here's what makes this even more disturbing. It's not just that the middle class is shrinking, it's where people are going when they leave it. A small number, very small, rise into the upper income bracket, but the overwhelming majority fall into the lower income tier. The middle class isn't disappearing into prosperity. It's disappearing into financial precarity. This is not happening in a vacuum. This is not a natural economic cycle. Every single force driving the decline of the American middle class can be traced to specific decisions, specific laws, specific people, and specific institutions. And in the next 30 minutes, we're going to name every single one of them. My name is Max, and this channel exists for one reason, to show you how money actually works in America. Not how your high school economics teacher said it works, not how politicians say it works on TV, but how it actually mechanically, ruthlessly works. Today's topic is the most important we've ever covered, because understanding why the middle class is disappearing isn't just history, it's a map, and a map is only useful if you know you're lost. Before we go any further, let's define what we're actually talking about. What is the middle class? Because this phrase gets thrown around constantly without any real precision. The Pew Research Center, which has been tracking this for decades, defines the middle class as households earning between 2/3 and double the national median income. As of 2024, that works out to roughly $56,000 to $169,000 per year for a family of 3. That is an enormous range. And yet even people at the top of that range, $169,000 a year, are reporting that they feel financially squeezed in major American cities. Why? Because income alone doesn't tell the full story. The cost side of the equation matters just as much as the earning side. And the cost side has been absolutely obliterated over the past 5 decades. Housing costs have increased by over 500% since 1970 when adjusted for inflation. Healthcare costs have risen by more than 700%. College tuition at 4-year universities has increased by over full 300%. These are not small adjustments. These are structural transformations in what it costs to exist as a middle-class American. Now think about wages in that same period. According to the Economic Policy Institute, the median worker's hourly compensation, adjusted for inflation, has increased by less than 18% since 1979. 18% over 45 years. While housing went up 500%. While healthcare went up 700%. While tuition went up 1,300%, you didn't just lose ground, you got buried. Here is how this plays out in real numbers. A family earning $80,000 a year sounds solidly middle class. But let's walk through their actual budget in 2024. Median rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in a mid-sized American city, $1,500 per month. That's $21,600 per year. Healthcare premiums for a family on an employer plan, approximately $7,000 annually in employee contributions. Student loan payments for the typical college-educated borrower, around $400 per month, $4,800 per year. Groceries for a family of 4, roughly $1,000 per month, $12,000 per year. Car payment and insurance, $700 per month, $8,400 per year. Utilities, phone, internet, $500 per month, $6,000 per year. That's $59,800 per year in baseline non-optional expenses, before taxes, before childcare, before clothing, before anything goes wrong. And after federal and state income taxes, which for an $80,000 income lands around $18,000, you are left with approximately $200 in breathing room for an entire year, $183 per month. That is the margin of the modern American middle class. $183 per month now between stability and catastrophe. One car repair, one medical bill, one missed paycheck, gone. Now here's the part that will make you genuinely angry. Every economic metric that politicians point to when they say the economy is doing great, GDP growth, stock market performance, unemployment rate, those metrics are not measuring your financial reality. GDP measures the total size of the economy, not how that wealth is distributed. The stock market measures the value of corporate assets, 93% of which are owned by the top 10% of Americans. Unemployment measures whether people have jobs, not whether those jobs pay enough to live on. The economy can be growing, the market can be soaring, unemployment can be low, and the middle class can still be drowning. To understand why the middle class is dying, we have to understand how it was born. Because the American middle class didn't happen naturally. It wasn't the inevitable result of capitalism. It was built, deliberately, intentionally, through specific policy choices made over a specific period of time. And if you understand that it was built by choices, you can understand that it is being destroyed by choices too. Let's go back to 1944, my friend. World War II just ended. America emerged from the war as the only major industrial power whose factories were not bombed into rubble. Europe was devastated. Japan was in ruins. The Soviet Union had lost 27 million people. But America? America's manufacturing base was intact, expanded, and running at full capacity. We were the workshop of the world, and because we manufactured everything, cars, steel, appliances, aircraft, consumer goods, we employed everyone. Factory workers in 1950 earned wages that could sustain a family on a single income. They had union contracts that protected their hours, their safety, and their pay. They had employer-sponsored pensions that guaranteed retirement security. They had health care paid for by their employers. The GI Bill gave veterans subsidized college educations, low-interest mortgages, and business loans. This was not charity, it was an investment in human capital. And it paid off spectacularly. From 1945 to 1973, a period economists call the Great Compression, income inequality in America actually fell. The rich got richer, yes, but workers got richer too, and at a faster rate. Productivity, how much each worker produced per hour, grew by roughly 2.5% per year. And wages grew right along with it, almost dollar for dollar. If you worked harder and produced more, you got paid more. That relationship, that contract between productivity and compensation, is what we call the American dream, and it was real. The top federal income tax rate in 1955 was 91%, on income over roughly $3 million in today's dollars. This is the number that makes modern conservatives recoil. But here's what that tax rate actually did. It funded the interstate highway system, which enabled commerce and suburban expansion. It funded the National Defense Education Act, which put millions of Americans through college. It funded Social Security expansion, Medicare, Medicaid, and the Veterans Administration. The wealthy paid in. Everyone benefited. That is not socialism. That is called a functional social contract. Then, almost to the day, it started to unravel. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon appeared on national television and made an announcement that most Americans didn't fully understand at the time, but that would change their financial lives forever. Nixon suspended the convertibility of the U.S. dollar into gold. The Bretton Woods International Monetary System, which had tied the dollar to gold at $35 per ounce since 1944, was over. The dollar was now a fiat currency, backed not by gold but by the full faith and credit of the United States government, which is to say, backed by a promise. Why does this matter? Because when currency is backed by a finite resource like gold, there is a natural limit on how much money can be created. When that limit is removed, governments and central banks can create money without constraint. And when more money chases the same amount of goods and services, prices rise. That's inflation. Not temporary, not occasional inflation. Structural, permanent, ongoing inflation that has eroded the purchasing power of every dollar Americans earn, save, and hold. Since 1971, the dollar has lost over 85% of its purchasing power. Then came the 1973 oil crisis. OPEC imposed an oil embargo on the United States in response to American support for Israel in the Yom Kippur War. Gas prices quadrupled almost overnight. Inflation, already rising, exploded, and something strange happened. Stagflation. Inflation and unemployment rising at the same time. It broke the prevailing economic consensus of the era. Into this chaos walked a new set of ideas. Supply-side economics, trickle-down theory. The idea that if you reduce taxes on the wealthy and corporations, they will invest more, hire more workers, and grow the economy so rapidly that everyone benefits. Cut the top, let it flow down. It sounds logical. It sounds fair. It had never been empirically proven to work at the scale being proposed. But it was politically irresistible to those who already held the most wealth. Ronald Reagan entered the White House in January 1981 with a mandate to get government off the backs of the American people. What that meant in practice: cut the top marginal tax rate from 70% to 28% over 8 years, deregulate industries from banking to telecommunications to airlines, and most consequentially, break the labor unions that had protected middle-class wages for 30 years. In August 1981, Reagan fired 11,345 striking air traffic controllers and banned them from federal employment for life. The results came quickly, and they were not what the supply-side economists promised. Union membership collapsed from its 1954 peak of 35% down to just 6% in private sector today. As union power evaporated, so did the wage floor that unions had maintained. Corporations began cutting benefits, outsourcing jobs, and holding wages flat. Productivity continued to climb. Wages stopped following. Now we get to the mechanics, the specific measurable documented forces that have been used to extract wealth from the middle class and concentrate it at the top. I'm going to call them weapons, because that's what they function as. Not accidents, not market forces, weapons. There are 5 of them: housing, healthcare, student debt, the tax code, and corporate consolidation. We happen 1. Housing. In 1970, the median home price was $23,000. The median household income was $9,900. That's a price-to-income ratio of 2.3. To buy a median home, you needed 2.3 years of your total household income. Today, 2024, the median home price is $428,000. Median household income is approximately $74,000. That's a ratio of 5.7, nearly 6 years of income just for the base price, before a 7% mortgage rate that adds hundreds of thousands more in interest. How did we get here? Zoning laws. Most American cities zone the vast majority of residential land exclusively for single-family housing, the most expensive, most space-inefficient type possible. Apartments, townhouses, and multifamily housing are restricted or outright banned in enormous swaths of the country. This artificially limits supply. When supply is limited and demand grows, prices rise. Second, and this is the one that should make every working American furious, institutional investors began purchasing single-family homes at massive scale starting around 2010. Firms like Blackstone, Invitation Homes, and American Homes 4 Rent purchased hundreds of thousands of homes across the country, often cash, sight unseen, above asking price. These are corporations with $300 billion balance sheets competing with a first-time buyer who scraped together $40,000 for a down payment. The family cannot compete. The algorithm wins. Weapon 2. Healthcare. Americans spend an average of $12,900 per person on healthcare annually. The next highest country, Germany, spends about $7,000. We spend twice as much as anyone else. And our health outcomes, life expectancy, infant mortality, chronic disease rates, are among the worst in the developed world. We are paying more and getting less. That gap is not inefficiency. That gap is profit. The average employer-sponsored family health insurance plan costs $23,968 per year total. The employee pays about $6,505 in premiums, but the employer's contribution, $17,000, is compensation that could otherwise be your paycheck. So the real cost to you is the full $23,960. And then deductibles on top. $3,000 average for a family before insurance covers anything. A single emergency room visit frequently costs $3,000 to $10,000. Most middle-class families have effectively no insurance coverage for routine emergencies. Weapon 3. Student debt. In 1980, the average annual cost of a 4-year public university was approximately $3,500, about $12,000 in today's dollars. Today, the average total annual cost is $28,840 for public and over $58,000 for private universities. The cost has more than doubled in real inflation-adjusted terms in a single generation. Total student loan debt in America, full $7 trillion. More than all credit card debt combined. Why did this happen? State governments began cutting higher education budgets in the 1980s. As state funding dried up, universities raised tuition. And as tuition rose, the federal government made student loans more widely available. More available loans meant universities could keep raising prices without students dropping out. They just took on more debt. It was a perfect cycle for universities, for banks, for the government. For students, it was a trap disguised as opportunity. And unlike virtually every other form of debt in America, student loans are almost entirely non-dischargeable in bankruptcy. Congress made that change in 2005. You can walk away from gambling debts in bankruptcy. You can walk away from medical bills, business debts, car loans. You cannot walk away from a student loan. The debt follows you, legally, permanently, until it is paid in full or until you die. Weapon 4. The tax code. A nurse working 12-hour shifts in an ICU pays a higher effective federal tax rate than a hedge fund manager who made $500 million last year. Not because the tax rates on paper are set that way, but because of how the tax code defines different types of income. Wages, money you earn by working, are taxed at up to 37%. Capital gains, money your investments earn, are taxed at just 15% to 20%. Carried interest, how hedge fund managers are compensated, is taxed as capital gains, saving them tens of millions per year. Between 1989 and 2018, the 400 wealthiest American families saw their effective federal tax rate drop from 47% to 23%. In that same period, the effective tax rate on the bottom half of Americans either held steady or increased when you account for payroll taxes, sales taxes, and state and local taxes. The wealthy pay lawyers and accountants hundreds of thousands of dollars per year to architect their tax exposure. The middle class fills out TurboTax in February and pays in full, every year, no exceptions. Weapon 5. Corporate consolidation. In 1980, America had hundreds of competing airlines, banks, grocery chains, healthcare systems, and media companies. Antitrust law, enforced aggressively from the 1930s through the 1970s, prevented any single company from dominating a market entirely. Competition was considered a public good. When businesses compete for your dollar, they improve products, lower prices, and treat workers better. That's the promise of capitalism. Starting in the 1980s, antitrust enforcement collapsed. The Consumer Welfare Standard said mergers were only problematic if they immediately raised consumer prices. Under this framework, a company could buy all of its competitors, lay off thousands, squeeze suppliers, and establish a monopoly. And as long as it didn't immediately raise prices, regulators would approve it. Corporations consolidated without limit. And they did. Today, 4 airlines control over 80% of U.S. air travel. 6 banks hold over half of U.S. banking assets. In most American cities, only 1 or 2 healthcare systems compete for patients. 4 companies control the majority of American grocery retail. 3 pharmacy benefit managers control 80% of all prescription drug pricing. When one company sets prices without competition, workers have fewer employers to negotiate with, consumers have fewer choices, and monopoly profit goes to shareholders, the wealthy. Here is where most financial commentary stops. It describes the problem and shrugs and calls it market forces. But markets don't design themselves. Markets are shaped by rules, and rules are written by people. Specifically, rules are written by people with enough money and power to influence the lawmakers who draft them. Let's name the specific moment this all became intentional. September 13, 1970. The New York Times Magazine publishes Milton Friedman's essay, "The Social Responsibility of Business is to Increase Its Profits." Friedman argues corporations have no obligation to workers beyond paying legal wages, no obligation to communities beyond obeying the law. Their one and only responsibility is to maximize returns for shareholders. Everything else is, in Friedman's words, pure and unadulterated socialism. This essay became the foundational philosophy of American corporate culture over the following 5 decades. Business schools taught it. MBA programs built curricula around it. Corporate boards adopted it. And it replaced a different philosophy that had quietly governed American business for 30 years. The idea that companies owe something to workers, communities, customers, and society. Henry Ford said he wanted to pay his workers enough that they could afford to buy his cars. That idea built the middle class. Friedman's idea dismantled it. But the Friedman doctrine alone wasn't enough. To fully extract value from workers and transfer it to shareholders, corporations needed a specific tool. They got it in 1982. Before 1982, stock buybacks were prohibited by the SEC as stock price manipulation. In 1982, Reagan's SEC chairman passed Rule 10b-18, which created a safe harbor for buybacks. Corporations could now repurchase their own shares without fear of manipulation charges. From 1982 to 2022, S&P 500 companies spent over $10 trillion on stock buybacks. $10 trillion. That would fund the entire U.S. federal budget for roughly 2 years. Instead of investing in worker wages, R&D, or community development, corporations used profits to buy back their own stock, making executives and shareholders richer. Workers received nothing. Now look at who benefits. The Federal Reserve's own data shows the top 10% of Americans own 93% of all stocks. The bottom 50% own less than 1% of stocks. So when $10 trillion flows into the stock market through buybacks, 93% of that benefit goes to the already wealthy. The middle class captures a sliver. The bottom half captures essentially nothing. This is not a glitch in the system. This is the system operating as designed. Then after the 2008 financial crisis, caused by reckless speculation by the very banks the government was about to rescue, the Federal Reserve launched quantitative easing. The Fed created trillions of dollars digitally and used them to purchase bonds and mortgage-backed securities from large financial institutions. Stock prices soared, bond prices soared, real estate prices soared. And who owns stocks, bonds, and real estate? The wealthy. Meanwhile, inflation from all that new money hit consumer goods, groceries, gas, rent, the things the middle class actually buys. During COVID-19 in 2020 and 2021, this dynamic reached its most obscene extreme. While 22 million Americans lost their jobs in weeks, while small businesses shuttered permanently, while families lined up at food banks, American billionaires increased their total wealth by $1.3 trillion. In less than 2 years, Jeff Bezos added approximately $75 billion. Elon Musk's wealth grew by over $140 billion. Crises do not destroy wealth at the top, they transfer it from the bottom to the top. So, where does this leave us? Is the middle class doomed? Is there no way out? Let me be very clear about something before I answer that. The goal of this video is not to make you feel hopeless. The goal is to make you feel accurately informed. Because most people are walking around with a fundamental misunderstanding of why they're struggling. Blaming themselves, blaming immigrants, blaming whoever the news station tells them to blame. The real answer is harder to see, but it's also more empowering. Because once you see the mechanism, you can begin to respond to it. The most important shift you can make is in how you think about wealth creation. The wealthy do not get wealthy by earning wages. They get wealthy by owning assets that produce income, Real estate, businesses, stocks, bonds, royalties. The middle class has been trained to trade time for money. Show up, work, get paid, spend, repeat. That cycle does not build wealth, it sustains consumption. And in an inflationary environment, it slowly destroys wealth. This doesn't mean you need to become a real estate mogul. It means understanding the difference between an asset and a liability. An asset puts money into your pocket even when you're not working. A liability takes money out. A car is a liability. A rental property can be an asset. An index fund in a Roth IRA is an asset that compounds over time, tax-advantaged. Building even a small base of assets, starting with whatever you have, starting today, is the behavioral difference between the wealthy and the middle class. Not intelligence, not luck. Behavior and access to knowledge. The second thing you can do is understand that this is a political problem, not just a personal finance problem. The tax code, housing policy, student loan law, antitrust enforcement, minimum wage, these are the direct levers that determine whether the middle class grows or shrinks. Every election cycle, you vote on these levers, usually without knowing it, because the conversation gets diverted into cultural issues designed to keep you emotionally engaged and economically distracted. Understanding economic policy is not optional. It is a survival skill. The American middle class was not a gift from the market. It was built by people who demanded it, through union organizing, through political activism, through tax policy, through investment in public infrastructure and education. It can be rebuilt, but rebuilding it requires that enough people understand what destroyed it in the first place. That's what this channel is for. That's why we make these videos, not to depress you, to arm you. If this video opened your eyes, share it. Every person who understands this system is one more person who can act on it. Subscribe if you want the unfiltered truth about how money works in America every single week. Drop a comment below. Do you feel like the system is working for you? I genuinely want to know. I'm Max. Stay informed, stay angry in the right direction, and I'll see you in the next one.